everyone, this is Pico Entertainment and we're back again, and here now we have another video for you, and we're going to talk about Shang Chi, the Legend of the Ten Rings, and its chances at the box office, and whether it will become the first real flop within the MCU. Now, I'm pretty much sure you all know what Shang Chi is, but just in case anybody watching this who doesn't, Shang Chi is the latest Marvel superhero movie centering on Shang Chi himself, essentially having to confront his past and his father's involvement within a dangerous Ten Rings organisation, if you remember, was referenced way back in the first Iron Man movie in 2008. The film is very notable, of course, because it is the first Asian-led superhero movie directed by Marvel, and as far as we know, the movie is still due for release on September the 3rd, 2021 in theatres only, and it recently had its red carpet premiere in Los Angeles, and the review embargo was lifted by certain people who had access, and it's opened up to a wave of positive reviews, as what you would normally expect from a movie when it opens a couple of weeks prior to going on wider release within cinemas. Now, as mentioned before, there's been much debate about Shang-Chi and how successful it will be, and whether it will be the first real true failure within the MCU. And I think there's a number of reasons why people are having this debate. Now, the first reason is that if we look at the perceived lack of marketing, and whilst I did like both trailers, and you can check out my review of those trailers within this channel, they didn't seem to garner a lot of traction and hype amongst fans in general. I will also say that the posters that they've released for the movies, certainly from the last couple of weeks, have looked very uninspired. You know, we have the typical composition where we have the floating heads around diagonal type of lighting and shading, and most of the characters have the same sullen expressions. We have some other posters which for some reason have ignored much more of a blue aesthetic, which I don't think is suitable for the Shang-Chi. Prior to that, a lot of the trailers and promotional material had a lot of red and yellows using as the colours, but we've had lots of posters which focus much more on blue and grey, so they just come off as very uninspiring and unimaginative, lacking a certain verve and energy. And I think the second reason why there is concern is because Shang-Chi himself is an unknown character within the Marvel universe. Now, I've credited that to an extent because I think if the MCU is going to go beyond Phase 4, Phase 5, Phase 6, then it can't just keep using the same characters overall. It's got to try and introduce new characters to the overall universe. In many ways, that was the foundation of the MCU to begin with, is that it was taking a chance on the lesser known characters at the time. Of course, the likes of Iron Man, Captain America and Thor, who were one or two tiers below the real main established properties for Marvel at the time, which was of course Spider-Man and X-Men. And by introducing new characters, that's how you keep the universe fresh and invigorated. But normally the method of Marvel has been to introduce these characters by smaller cameos within the bigger movies and then build them up steadily before giving them their own main story. We saw this essentially with Captain America Civil War, where we had cameos for both Spider-Man and Black Panther, and then they would go on to have their own movies overall. If we look at Wanda Maximoff, she had a smaller role in Age of Ultron, and then they transferred that a lot more through Civil War, and then eventually she got her own lead story in WandaVision. And Shang-Chi himself was a very little known character in the comics, even less known than I would say the likes of Ant-Man, who of course got his own movie. And we knew Ant-Man, or Hank Pym, because he was the creator of Ultron, and also he was a major part of the Avengers team in the comics as well. But we've had very little knowledge in terms of Shang-Chi, and even people within the comic book fandom weren't really particularly asking for a Shang-Chi movie. So whilst I always commend focusing on lesser known characters, that's another hurdle that they will face when it comes to promoting this movie. We then have to talk about the Marvel brand itself in terms of where it currently stands during the Phase 4, which admittedly so far hasn't been quite the same level of hype and excitement than what it was around the latter stages of Phase 3, in particular when we had the likes of Black Panther, Infinity War and Endgame. You know, the MCU is very much starting again, going back to the Phase 1 roots, and I think they've had mixed results so far with the content that they've put out previously. The 3 Disney Plus shows, WandaVision, Falcon, The Winter Soldier and Loki, have all had mixed receptions, and you can check out my commentary on those shows within this channel. We then have to talk about Black Widow, which people will say was a flop, but it can't be denied that the dual release in terms of theatres and Disney Plus took a lot out of the potential box office from Black Widow. leaving it open ever more so to piracy. Many people were able to obtain HD copies of the movie for free. This affected very much the movie's performance within cinemas, and the underperformance of Black Widow has very much led Disney to change its release strategy for Shang Chi, which will now be released theatrically and stay there for 45 days before coming onto the Disney Plus platform. And of course, as we all know, the fallout of Black Widow continued when lead actress Scarlett Johansson went ahead by filing a lawsuit against Disney, feeling that the move to Disney Plus took away a lot of the theatrical performance, as I mentioned before, which in result took away a lot of the extra add-on bonuses that she was due to receive if the film had performed well at the box office. There have been further back and forth comments made by Disney disputing the lawsuit, certainly hinting that maybe Scarlett Johansson was more considerate her own selfish financial needs as opposed to the overall pandemic. And this has resulted in them severing ties with Scarlett Johansson overall in terms of working together for future movies. More recently, we've had the alleged controversy when Shang-Chi lead actor Simu Liu responded to Disney CEO Bob Chapek's comments when he was giving his earnings call for Disney on Shang-Chi. Basically, he stated that it was more of an experiment in terms of the 45-day release prior to it going on Disney Plus. And it was clear that was what Chapek was talking about. But Simu Liu took exception to this, stating that in one of his tweets that we are not an experiment, basically implying that Chapek's comments were more about the Asian demographic and casting of the movie. Now, to be honest, I think this whole event was staged and I think it was fabricated to try and generate a lot of traction and attention and hype surrounding the Shang-Chi movie itself. All of these events, recently reported on social media, damaged the overall perception of the Marvel brand, which for the most part has been drama free. We always associate the MCU as being a well run, solid entity and where there is harmony amongst all of the casting and the production and the directors. It very much gives that family orientated vibe where we've got to know all of these characters now for the best part of over 10 years, and we've seen them in multiple interviews and conventions and events together, really displaying that sense of camaraderie and togetherness which exudes confidence. And I think that's what transfers over to the audience, and that's what appeals them more to watching these. But all of these recent events, I think, has exposed the brand, particularly on Disney's side. Maybe the general audience may not pay as particular to attention, but many people will, and suddenly now people are asking questions, as maybe not all is as what it seems behind the scenes. They question whether the actors are being treated as well as what they should be, and whether there is a certain disharmony or split or division actually within the whole of the Marvel brand and its association with Disney. We then talk about the movie's perception within China, and let's be honest, that really was the prime reason that Shang-Chi was being made to begin with. It was Marvel wanting to extend their brand of diversity and representation into the Chinese market, hoping to capitalise on a massive box office potential from China, which brings a lot of money for big budget franchises. A lot of the Marvel movies have succeeded there, and of course we've seen recently with the likes of the Fast and Furious franchise and the Godzilla movies, of course. But China has responded very poorly and negatively to the project of Shang-Chi. They feel that the movie itself is just a cynical push for diversity, and that Marvel are not really interested in true representation of their culture. Many felt that the characters associated with the source material, when we look at the likes of Fu Manchu or the Mandarin, which we associate with the movies that will be used in this particular story, and they feel that those characters are far more offensive and stereotypical of the Asian communities. If there is also the perception given from various sites that many Chinese audiences haven't taken too well to the overall look of certain actors, not deeming them attractive enough or truly reflecting the true representation of Chinese culture. So all of these factors I mentioned will really play a key role. Currently, as it stands, I do believe that the movie still won't be released in China, so that's something to consider very much so when looking at the film's overall box office. So when assessing all of these debates that I've brought up throughout this video, how successful will it be? What will determine Shang-Chi in terms of it being a natural flop? Well, for me, I would say if it grossed around anything from 300 million worldwide to anything under, I think anything under 300 million for me will constitute a flop. If we look at the whole movies within the MCU, I think the lowest grossing entry at the time was going way back in phase 1, and that was The Incredible Hulk, and I think that grossed something around 265 million. But we have to remember that was of course when they were just building the universe overall and finding their feet in terms of which characters would work more in their solo movies and which characters work more in a team up movie. So and allow that in terms of that performance, and I think ever since phase 2, the lowest performing movie has been the first Ant-Man, which grossed over 515 million at the box office. Now, people will refer back to Black Widow, but as I said before, there were certain variables going against that movie. Now, there will probably be less leeway given to Shang-Chi, given the fact that it will stay in theatres for 45 days. And as I mentioned before, if Black Widow had a similar strategy, then that would have weighed way more money than what it did essentially right now. And even as we currently debate this now, Black Widow I believe now is close to coming under to 400 million worldwide. So is it possible then that Shang-Chi could only make 300 million or less at the box office? Well, I think at this stage it is possible, primarily again because we are denying the Chinese box office. We do of course have to take into account the pandemic and the fact that yes, we have seen more movies come out and be very successful, the likes of Fast 9, Godzilla vs Kong and A Quiet Place Part 2, but we still have to recognise that not all territories are open in terms of their theatrical markets. So it's still opening to a limited capacity, and take away the Chinese box office potential as well, it is very possible, I believe, that it could make around 300 million. And you have to remember the budget currently stands around 200 million as well. And we did talk a lot previously about the Suicide Squad and how it's going to lose big time in terms of its overall potential in terms of profit. So I'd like to think Shang-Chi will probably make more money than Suicide Squad, but I wouldn't be overly shocked if it only came in around 300 million at the box office. And if it arrived at those figures, then I would deem it a flop, and really that would be the first major flop for the MCU. And then that's really when they would have to take a step back and have much more consideration in terms of the newer characters that they're bringing to the universe. I also have big concerns about the Eternals as well, but I will talk about that in a separate video. Now, having said that, we could say that the MCU could bounce back because we do know their next upcoming movies include Thor: Love and Thunder, Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, and Spider-Man: No Way Home. Now, all of those three are guaranteed box office successes whenever you release them, as long as they don't release them on Disney Plus, of course. So they've got no concerns there. So even if Shang-Chi does flop, and if Eternals does flop as well, the MCU as a brand has got 3 potential movies where it can bounce back big time. So if Shang-Chi proves to be a financial disappointment, I wouldn't say it's the beginning of the end of the MCU, but I would say they do have to consider a lot more when introducing newer characters and really try and transfer audiences and give that impression much more that these films coming out are not just pandering to certain demographics in order just to sell merchandising and ticket sales, that we have to get back to that phase 1 mentality of where we are looking to introduce these newer characters because they're cool and they've got great fantastic stories that should be introduced to a massive audience. And I think had that approach been taken with Shang-Chi, then maybe it would garner better success at the box office. But as we say, we don't know, it could be an absolute blockbuster hit if we go by the positive reviews, and of course we have to wait till the movie actually opens where we get much more of the, I would say, varied reviews to get a better gist of how good the movie is. And of course, when the movie is released, I will of course provide a spoiler and non-spoiler review and give my own thoughts and feelings on the movies overall. But we will wait and see whether Shang-Chi will become the first flop within the MCU. Let me know what you think in the comments below. How good or bad do you think the chances are of Shang-Chi translating to general audiences overall? Let me know your thoughts, and we will have further discussions, of course, when we get the actual figures of the film's opening box office weekend. So those are my thoughts and feelings and discussion on Shang-Chi, The Legend of the Ten Rings, and whether it will become the first flop within the MCU. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Please also hit and like the subscription and notification buttons so I can provide you with more high quality content like this in the future. But that's it for now. Take care of yourselves, stay at safe distances, and I will see you very, very soon.